In this lecture, we're going to be learning about prefix and postfix addition and subtraction. We have an example here, and it is a simple example we've seen a lot of times by now. We have a variable value, it is an integer, and we have a 5 inside. We can add a 1 to it, or we can increment it by 1. This is another term we use in programming languages. When we say we are incrementing a value, we are adding something to it. In this case, we are incrementing it by 1, and we are basically going to store a 6 in this value here. So if we print this out, we're going to get a 6 here. This is what we would expect. We are resetting the value to 5, and we are going to minus 1 or decrement by 1, and the result is going to be saved in value again. So the second stdcout statement here is going to print a 4. This is something you should expect. Now, another thing we can do in C++ is do something like value ++ here. And what do we mean by that? When you use a postfix increment operator like this, the first thing you should know is that this is going to increment by 1. It's not going to increment by any other value. C++ doesn't provide a way for you to specify another number to increment by. So value ++ here is going to increment by 1. But another thing you should know is that it's not going to increment directly. What's going to happen here? If you look to the top here, we have a value 5. When execution hits this stdcout statement, we are going to grab the value here. So here we're going to really print a 5, but as soon as this statement is done, the value is going to increment by 1. So the next time somebody is going to use this value here, he's going to find in a 6. And that's what we have here. So the first one is going to print a 5 because we're going to grab the value in here as is. But as soon as we have our value, this is going to increment by 1. This is what we mean by this value ++ here. And the second statement is going to print a 6 because it is already incremented. And we call this postfix increment because ++ is after the value here. And this is really what this operator does. And sometimes it is going to come in handy in your C++ applications. We can also do the same thing with minus. It is going to grab whatever value we have in this variable. So we have in a 5. So that's what we're going to print here. And the next statement is going to find it already decremented by 1. Because after we have our 5, we're going to decrement by 1. That's what we are saying here. And we're going to find in a 4 because 5 decremented by 1 becomes a 4. I really hope this makes sense. Okay, so what we have seen here is postfix increment and decrement. But we can also do a prefix version of this thing. If you look at the example we have here, we have a 5. And we are saying ++ value. So this is going to increment the value directly. So as soon as this statement is executed, the ++ value statement here, we're going to have a 6 inside. And if we print it, we're going to get a 6. And this is what you see here. If we go down, we are resetting our value. And we are going to prefix increment in place. So in here, we are going to increment the value before we actually print it here. And we are also going to get a 6 here. I hope this makes sense. And if you have any problem with this, I think if we go in Visual Studio Code, you're going to have a better way to see this. You're going to see the code running and make sense of it. Okay, so I think that now you understand why we're going to have these numbers printed. If we go down, we can do the same thing with decrementing. We have a value here, it's 5. If we prefix decrement it, it's going to be a 4 here. And if we print it, we're going to get a 4. If we go down here, we are resetting that to 5. And we are going to prefix decrement in place. And this is also going to print a 4 because we have a 5 here. And if we decrement it by 1, we're going to get a 4. And that's what we're going to get here. Okay, this is really all these prefix and postfix increment and decrement operators are about. We are going to go in Visual Studio Code and actually see this running. Okay, here we are in our working directory. We're going to do the usual. We're going to copy code from our template project. We're going to put that in here. We're going to go up and open this up in Visual Studio Code. So we're going to remove things we don't need, and we're going to remove this. And we are going to put in the code we exactly saw in the slides. Here we have a value. It is an integer and it is 5. If we increment it by 1, we're going to get 6 here. Okay, and if we print it, that's what we're going to get. We are resetting this to 5. And if we decrement it by 1, we're going to get a 4 here. So if we run this piece of code, we should have a 6 here printed out and a 4 down here. We're going to bring up our terminal and build this with GCC. The build is going to go through, and if we run the program, we're going to get the value is 6 and it is 4, and this is really what we expect here. Okay, now that this is really clear, we're going to go down and play with postfix, increment, and decrement. I am going to put in a separator here so that we can clearly see in our terminal here. And we are going to put in our test code that we are going to use to play with this. Let's bring this down a little bit so that you can see everything. We can remove these things. We don't need them anymore. Okay, we are going to take the value we had. We're going to reset that to a 5. And if we value plus here, this is going to be a 5 because we're going to capture the value as is. So here we're going to get a 5. But next time we get this value, it's going to already be a 6 because we increment immediately after capturing the value here. So here we're going to get a 5 and here we're going to get a 6. I hope this makes sense. And if we go down here, we are resetting our value to 5 before we do any decrementation. We are going to capture the value as is because we are doing postfix decrement. And here we're going to get a 5 because we are capturing the value as is. But as soon as we capture our value, we're going to decrement it. And the other statement here is going to get a decremented value, and that's going to be a 4. So here we're going to print 5, 6, 5, 4. Let's try and build this with GCC to see that we have no problems. We have no problems. The build is good. If we try to run Rooster now, we are going to get the results we had before. But for this code we just put in here, the value is going to be a 5, and that's what we have here. And we're going to get a 6, which is coming from here. After, we are going to decrement, and we are going to capture the value as is. We're going to get this 5 here. And for the last statement, we're going to get a 4 because the value is already decremented. And that's the 4 we are seeing here. I really hope this makes sense. And this really covers the postfix, increment, and decrement operators. The last thing we want to see in this lecture is that we can also do prefix, increment, and decrementation. We're going to go down here and set up a place where we're going to be playing with this. So we're going to say prefix, and we are going to put in our code because I don't want to type all this. That would waste your valuable time. But I do encourage you to type these things out and really drill them in your brain because that's how you're going to learn. Okay, let's bring this down so that we can understand this piece of code. So we are starting by resetting our value to 5. And notice here that we do plus value. This is going to increment value right away. By this time, the value is going to be 6. And if we print it out here, we're going to have a 6 printed out. We're going to reset it to 5, and then we're going to implement that in place. This is also going to be printing 6. And if we go down, we're going to do the same version of the same thing, but we are going to be decrementing. So we're going to decrement the value that we just reset here. Here it's going to become a 4, and that's what we're going to print. And if we go down here, we reset it again to a 5, and we prefix decrement it in place. So the 5 here is going to become a 4 in here, and that's what we're going to print out. If we build and run, that's what we're going to get. We're going to run our task to build with GCC. The build is good. And if we run our Rooster application, the results for the code we just put in here are just going to show up here. and you see that we get a 6, 6. This is 6, the other 6. And for the last two statements, we're going to be getting 4s, and that's what we have here. I really hope that now you have a better idea of this prefix and postfix increment and decrement operators, and you're going to make use of them when they really help you design your applications better. Okay, so these are your tools. Use them when they make sense. Another thing that I want to emphasize here is that these operators only increment or decrement by 1. You can't make them do things in increments of 5 or 7 or 10. They are going to work in increments or decrements of 1. We are going to see a way we can do that with other operators in the next lecture, but these prefix and postfix operators can't do that. And another thing that some of you might be wondering about is if we have the same kind of operators with multiplication or division, and we don't have those operators in C++. Maybe you're going to have them in the future when they make sense, but in the current version of C++, we don't have them. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we're going to learn about compound assignment operators.